Howdy. Howdy. It's such a pleasure to see you all here tonight. I'm Raymond Robertson. I'm the director of the Mosbacher Institute here at the Bush School of Government and Public Service. And again, I'd like to thank you all for coming. This is such an important event for us because we're bringing home one of our own, and I'm really excited about having him share his ideas with you here tonight. Before we get started, of course, I'd like to recognize a few of our very distinguished guests and thank them for coming. Representative Bill Flores is here tonight, who needs no introduction whatsoever. And of course, Warren Finch has joined us here from the George W. Bush Presidential Foundation, H.W. Bush Library and Museum. Levi McClinney's here from the Texas A&M Regent, an engineering student, I think. Is Levi here? Okay. Is Carl Mooney here, the mayor? Here we go. Please stand up. The mayor of College Station. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're really glad to see you here. Thank you very much. And you know, one of the things we noticed out there in the reception was Congressman Hurd could barely get through the crowd without recognizing people he knew. Would y'all just raise your hand if you were a former classmate, professor, or co-worker of Congressman Hurd? I just want to thank you all for coming back. You really made him feel right at home. So thank you all so much for coming. In order to get started tonight, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Frank Ashley up to the stage. He's, for those of you who don't know him, he's our Senior Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the Bush School and has been absolutely wonderful in his work that he's done here at the Bush School. And he's just following up an entire wonderful, illustrious career throughout the Texas A&M system. He's worn many hats. He's been the Dean of the College of Education, Texas A&M University of Commerce, and the Director of Admissions and Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies at the College of Education. And I could go on and on. He doesn't want me to lay it on. But if you please help me welcome Dr. Frank Ashley. Thank you very much.
Howdy. Howdy. I love that. Congressman Will Hurd, a San Antonio native and a Texas A&M computer science graduate, never planned on being a member of Congress. He was excited to spend his entire career serving his country by stopping terrorists, preventing Russian spies from stealing our secrets, and putting nuclear weapons proliferators out of business as an undercover officer in the CIA. Then he realized that his expertise in cybersecurity and intelligence was sorely needed in Congress, the people charged with making informed decisions about how to serve and protect our country. Since being elected in 2014, he's continued to blaze his own trail to deliver bipartisan results for the 800,000 Texans he calls his bosses by working with anyone, regardless of politics and party, to help make sure our kids are ready for the future, that our country is safe, and that the United States will always be the leader of the free world. Texas Monthly and Politico magazines have called him the future of the GOP. His efforts to put good policy over good politics has clearly struck a chord in a country that is often consumed with what divides us instead of what unites us. Now, on a personal note, none of Congressman Hurd's accomplishments are a surprise to me. I've been around here for a little over 30 years. And I remember Will Hurd as a president of the student body here at Texas A&M University. A student body president that led us through one of the most tragic events in the history of this great university. That's the collapse of Bonfire. That happened 20 years ago, next month. I can still remember like it was yesterday. As student body president, he was thrust into the local, the state, and the national spotlight. I still remember his poise, his compassion, and his heartfelt grief. Will, I want to let you know that you made us proud. The way that you represented your fellow students and the university. I look back then, and right at 20 years ago, I said, this kid's special. I think we all know that that's true now. Will Hurd is a very special person. I want to let you know that we thank you for everything you've done for this university, for this state, and our country. And with that, I'd like to invite Congressman Will Hurd to the podium.
Thanks, brother. Thank you. Oh, y'all stop. Y'all are too kind. Y'all are too kind. Thank you. Thank you. You know, appreciate, y'all are, please. It's a lot of pressure when you get a standing ovation at the beginning of a speech. You know, you're gonna have to deliver. A couple of housekeeping issues. I am not Dave Chappelle or Jerry Seinfeld, okay? So you can take your phones out, take pictures, all right? Just tag me on social media, that's all I ask. Hurd on the Hill. Just remember that. And while I'm there, everybody smile. Awesome, thank you. It is, it's a pleasure to always be back in Aggieland, the place that taught me how to have a servant's heart. And this is a place that influenced who I have become, and so it's wonderful to be back here with y'all today. You know, my story is simple. I was in San Antonio where I grew up, and I decided to come to Texas A&M. My freshman year, I was studying computer science, and I'm walking across campus in the Zachary building, and I see a sign that says, "Take 2 journalism classes in Mexico City for $425. I had $450 in my bank account, so I go to Mexico. Fell in love being in another culture. I thought it was cool seeing things I had only read about in books, and I decided to add international studies as a minor. And my first class I had a guest lecturer. He was only a guest lecturer at the time, a dirtbag named Jim Olson. You know, you can tell him I said that, okay? And I always got to remind everybody talks about Jim Olson as this amazing CIA officer, and he was. But he was the second best officer in his family. His wife was better, okay? And he told the stories that y'all have heard, that inspired me to want to go into the agency. And when I graduated from A&M at 22, I went into the CIA. I was the dude in the back alleys at 4 o'clock in the morning collecting intelligence on threats to our homeland. Best job on the planet. I did 2 years at what I used to call our super secret CIA training facility called The Farm. Now it's on Google Maps. And it is. Then I did 2 years in India, 2 years in Pakistan, 2 years in New York City when I was doing interagency work, and then a year and a half in Afghanistan where I managed all of our undercover operations. And in addition to collecting intelligence on threats to our homeland, I had to brief members of Congress. I probably met 200 members of Congress, R's, D's, men, women, people from all 50 states. And I wish when I was overseas, I had met someone like a Bill Flores. Now, Bill wasn't in Congress at the time, but I didn't meet the people of Bill's caliber when I was there. I wish I would have met another Texan like Mac Thornberry or Elise Stefanik from New York City. If I would have met those people, you would never have heard my name again because I would have stayed in the CIA. But I was shocked with the caliber of some of our elected officials. And my mama said, you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And so I left Afghanistan, moved to Helotes, Texas, and ran for Congress. Now, I lost that election by 700 votes. Glad I don't tell that story anymore, Bill. But it gave me an opportunity to be a partner in a consulting firm, start a cybersecurity company, and ran again in 2014. And I will say that all of these experiences helped me, frame the issues that I've had to deal with in Congress. And one of those, my time in the CIA, has helped me deal with the issue of immigration. When I was in Pakistan, I was meeting with a guy who was a former Mujahideen. The Mujahideen is the fighters in the 80s that fought the Russians. This guy was somewhere between the age of 65 and 120, right? I didn't know, look, if you're one of the original Mujahideen, you've lived a rough life, right? And I would sneak into his compound And we would sneak into a special room, and I would sit cross-legged on a nice rug like this, and he would generally have 2 pomegranates of unblemished skin. And we would sit there, and he would mash the pomegranate, right? Until it looked like a water balloon. And then he would take the biggest knife I'd ever seen in my life and cut a hole and stick a straw in it, and we would drink fresh pomegranate juice, and we would talk about issues. And a lot of times he would just stare at me, right? Sometimes he would tell me a story, and one day he said, "Mr. Willie," everybody in South Asia called me Mr. Willie for some reason. He said, "Mr. Willie, I've been a Pakistani for 70 years. Pakistan as a country is a young country. I've been a Muslim for 1,640 years, but I've been a Pashtun for 3,333 years." Right? And it's hard for us as Americans to understand and appreciate how long, like thousands of years of culture, how it has an impact on who we are, on people's hearts, but it does. And that experience helped me really understand and try to put myself in other people's shoes, especially when it came to the issue of immigration. We have generational defining issues, challenges that we have to meet, right? And one of those challenges is the fact that we have an unbearable amount of pressure on our borders, and it's being caused by extreme poverty, lack of economic opportunities in specifically the Northern Triangle. That's El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, right? And the way we should be dealing with this issue is deal with the issue there before it gets to our borders, right? And we should, look, as a member of Congress, I represent more border than anybody else, 820 miles. I represent 29 counties, 2 time zones. It takes 10 and a half hours to drive from one corner of my district to the other at 80 miles an hour, which is the speed limit in most of the district, right? But some of my former interns are in here tonight, and they learned the hard way that it's not the speed limit in all of the district. And I can tell you, representing 820 miles of the border, that what is happening at our border is indeed unprecedented. And although we're seeing numbers going down, and that's primarily because of the Texas heat, right? We don't know if these changes is just the normal changes we see every year, or if it's because of some of the changes that we've seen our allies like Mexico do. But it is likely that we're going to see these numbers and these pressures rise again, and we're not prepared for that problem. We have seen tragic images of parents and their children drowning in the banks of the Rio Grande. That these images shocked the entire nation. But these scenes covered in the news are not new to those of us who represent border communities. Now, Congress was able to pass a bill in June to provide funding, but this was only a short-term fix. But Congress and the administration, we got to do more to address mass immigration, and that's what I said earlier: extreme poverty, lack of economic opportunity, and violence in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Imagine how bad the situation is for you to put your child on a 2,300-mile trek that you know is going to be dangerous. You know that trip from Central America to South Texas is going to be hard. But your situation is so bad that you think this is the only way that your child is going to be able to have a future. Remember that when we're having these debates. Now, the solutions to many of these problems are not necessarily new. And these are not problems just for the United States and Mexico. This is a problem for the entire Western Hemisphere, and we need the entire Western Hemisphere to be involved. And so how do we fix this? It's a fraction of the cost to try to solve problems there before they get to our shores. So I think the Secretary of State, Secretary Pompeo, should immediately appoint a special representative to the Northern Triangle. This is a senior diplomat whose responsibility will be to coordinate all elements of the U.S. government in those 3 regions. It should also be the element that works with the Organization of American States, with the International Development Bank, in order to have a broader plan. And this, I say the broader plan, We should be thinking of a Marshall Plan for that part of the world, for the Northern Triangle specifically. Because this, again, it's a fraction of the cost to solve the problem there. Right? This is part of our hemisphere. And one of the reasons we should be passing NAFTA, and we were talking about this earlier, is we should be thinking about North American supply chains in order to deal with the competition of China. And the competition is real. Why should we care? Because if the United States economy is no longer the most important economy in the world, it's going to impact all of our ways of life. Our children and our children's children's ability to live with a quality of life that we have lived with is not going to be there. This is truly a competition, and we should be working with our allies, and we should be working with those countries within our own hemisphere to do with this. We also need to be addressing some of the criminal elements that are exacerbating this problem: human smugglers, human traffickers, and drug smuggling organizations. The amount of drugs sold in the United States of America is about $40 billion. That's a very conservative little c estimate. To give you some context for that, Starbucks, they only sell about $32 billion worth of coffee. McDonald's sells like $34 billion worth of Big Macs, right? This is the size of the problem, which means the drug trafficking organizations are well capitalized. Right? They're using some of the latest and greatest technology in order to evade our defenses. And so one of the things that we should be doing is making sure the intelligence we're collecting on these entities, that we're treating them the way we treated terrorist organizations. We know if you're trying to smuggle someone, you got to put your number out there for people to call you. We know what those numbers are. We know the meeting locations where someone picks up the bus in order to drive from Tegucigalpa to Eagle Pass. We know the license plates of many of those buses. But the national intelligence community is not leveraging this information to stop that problem there. So if we work with our allies in those countries, and they're willing to work with us, right, and we deal with that problem there, then that allows us to coordinate and streamline on our side of the border. Because I think the third step we need to do to solve this problem is we should streamline legal immigration. If you are at Texas A&M University and you are in a STEM degree, when you walk across the stage and get your diploma, there should be a visa in it. If the Chinese want to steal our technology, and guess what? They've been doing it for decades, they still are now. Right? If they're going to steal our technology, we should be stealing their engineers. Right? I want them to come here. I want them to contribute to American companies. Right? I want them to grow companies here. Right? And there's always going to be a debate. There's a question about, should we change immigration for merit? What does merit mean? A lot of people say, oh, if you have a PhD in astrophysics and you're from Sweden, that's merit. Yeah, if you want to come, I want you here, come on. But Bill and I had a colleague named Mia Love. Mia Love is fantastic. Her father and mother basically cleaned hospitals, not hospitals, hotels. They produced Mia Love. I think that's merit. I have learned in my 42 years that being hardworking is actually a skill. And it's not necessarily something that can be taught. So if you're going to be a productive member of our society, if you're going to contribute to our economy, if you're going to contribute to our culture, let's get you here. But let's do it legally. Right? And there's actually more support on this issue of streamlining legal immigration than most folks realize. There's an issue called DACA. These are 1.2 million kids that have only known the United States of America as their home. They are contributing to our society. They are kids that have passed background checks. They're going to school. They're working hard. They're contributing to our society. They're already Americans. Let's streamline that. Oh, and guess what? 76% of Republicans believe this should be streamlined. Now, we can clap for that for sure. But unfortunately, sometimes politics get in the way, right? And this is something that we're going to continue to work on, because for 243 years, the United States of America has benefited from the brain drain of every other country. And I want to continue that. And I want to benefit from the hard-working drain as well. So if you're going to come here and be productive, let's do it as quickly as possible. But let's do it ultimately legally. When I was in Pakistan in 2005, there was an earthquake that killed 80,000 people. At the time, Ryan Crocker, who we all know, was my ambassador. I think Ryan Crocker is the best thing our diplomatic corps has produced since George C. Marshall. Right, Ryan Crocker, yeah. Ryan Crocker was an amazing person, and this earthquake was so disastrous that the Pakistani government didn't know what they could do, what they should be doing. And so the ambassador came to my boss, the chief of station, and said, hey, can you send a team up to Muzaffarabad to figure out what we can do? Muzaffarabad is the capital of Azad Kashmir. Azad Kashmir is one of the areas that India and Pakistan have been fighting over. Muzaffarabad was also a place where several Pakistani terrorist groups trained. So a lot of Americans didn't go up there. So I led a team of about 4 people up to this part of Kashmir to figure out what the Pakistani government and people needed. And they needed airlift, because Muzaffarabad is in the Hindu Kush Mountains, about 14,000 feet. There were other villages even higher up. And so after a major 7.6 earthquake, right, that killed 80,000 people, there was a lot of damage. So we decided they needed airlift. And so we told Ambassador Crocker, he got on the phone and got 22 Chinook helicopters up to northern Pakistan. And I had been there for about 5 days, and I was going to jump on one of these helicopters. I was helping to direct this airlift, and I jumped on one of these helicopters to go down to where my bed down location was going to be. And we got a report that there was a village that had been without food, water, power for 5 days. And by the way, it was in the middle of winter, negative 20 degrees below zero, right? A legitimate negative 20 degrees below zero. And so we made a decision. We're going to stop in this village, pick up these villagers, and take them where we were going. So we land, and we open the big bay doors of the CH-47 helicopter. And if you've ever seen a helicopter crew, they look like they're from outer space, right? Outfit, the black mask, hoses connected everywhere. And these villagers, about 200, start piling on this Chinook. And there was this village elder who had a little girl, 6 or 7 years old, who lost both her mother and father in the earthquake. She sees this scene, and she is screaming bloody murder. She's scared. She thinks these people are coming from outer space. And the village elder hands her to me. And I hold on to this little girl as tight as I can. And halfway through the trip, she finally relaxes and lays her head on my shoulder. And we land where we were going, open the bay doors, everybody starts piling off. I put the little girl down. She takes about 10 steps, turns around, comes back, and gives me the biggest hug I've ever gotten in my life. Right? Except for maybe the one I got from Sharon Riley earlier today. Sharon. And probably about as big as a hug I'm going to give Marilyn White. I see you, Marilyn. And this little girl, this 6, 7-year-old girl who had just lost her mom and dad in the earthquake, goes over to the helicopter crewman, kisses him on the hand. And he pats her on the head and smiles real big, gives her a thumbs up or a gig 'em, depending on where you're from. And she smiles, returns a gesture with a big smile, gives a thumbs up, and runs away. Right? That little girl's face is seared into my brain because it is an example of what we did that day, that how the United States government is the only country in the world that has the resources and the willingness to help people even if they're 7,000 miles away, right? We are a country that is based on an ideal, right? And our actions as individuals, our actions as a government have to represent that ideal. And I think one of those ideals and things that we exhibited that day, helping people even if they're 7,000 miles away, was something a lot of us probably learned on Sunday. When Jesus Christ was asked by the Pharisees in the Second Temple, he said, the Pharisees asked him, what's the most important commandment? And he said, love thy Lord God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul. But a lot of people forget, he said, equally as important, love thy neighbor like thyself, right? If we did that a little bit more, guess what? We'd be able to help solve this extreme poverty, lack of economic opportunity, and we would recognize that those people are doing the same thing we would be doing if we were in that same situation. That we would recognize that for 243 years, we have benefited from everyone else. And so it's great to be able to work on this issue. It's great that there's more young people that care about this issue as well. Dr. Ashley talked about bonfire. You know, and it's something that I think about a lot. It's crazy to think it's been 20 years. Jamie Hand, class of 03, was going to be an architect. Tim Curley, class of 03, was in the Corps. He might have gone into the military. Right? Jeremy Frampton was a poet. Actually wrote some great poetry. We do not know if Jamie Hand would have made buildings that inspired us. We don't know if Tim would have been in the military, representing our country and keeping us safe. We don't know if Jeremy Frampton would have been the first Aggie poet laureate. We don't know. We won't know. But one thing I do know is that they would not have been living their life in vain. And so that experience, to me, what I've taken away is I try to make sure that I'm maximizing my opportunities that are given to me because there's people that didn't have those. And what inspires me is a number of young folks that are here that care about your country, that care about your world, that are not going to live your life in vain, and I appreciate that. And I'm glad that there are institutions like Texas A&M that further that servant's heart. So thanks for being here today. I know I'm getting ready to get grilled by by an expert, questioner, but it's always a pleasure to be back in Aggie land. God bless you, and may God continue to bless these United States of America.
Thank you. Congressman Hurd, thank you so much for those remarks. I'll let you get that back up for a second. Before we begin, obviously, I don't know how intensive the grilling is going to be here tonight, but I definitely think I would like to first offer a reflection. What I think was many were feeling in the audience was, you make us really feel proud to be an American, and you remind us what it is that makes this country really great. So I just want to thank you very much for that. Could you all help me? Thank you very much. We're so happy to have you back, and I hope you'll always consider Aggieland your home, especially here at the Bush School at the Mosbacher Institute. One of the things you started out your talk with, which was this Aggie experience that is very special and very unique. There's no place like it in the world. I'd like to just expand on that. Can you expand on it? Like, what was it about the Aggie values and experience that really contributed to such a successful career in public service?
So when I was a sophomore in high school, I got an internship at the Southwest Research Institute. This is one of the largest private research facilities in the United States of America. And I worked under a female engineer who went to Stanford. Now, I don't know what a sophomore in high school whose only technical capability at that time was to be able to type 75 words a minute, what I contributed to the area of robotics at that time, but Dr. Marshall inspired me to want to do computer science. And because she went to Stanford, I was going to go to Stanford. And I applied to Stanford, got accepted, got a lot of money to go to Stanford, and I had a counselor in my high school who kept harassing me to go do a tour of Texas A&M. Now, I'd applied to A&M, I applied to UT. And I finally told this counselor, I said, if I go, will you leave me alone? And he said, yes. So I came up to Aggieland and fell in love, right? I literally put my application, my acceptance to come to A&M here, and part of it was what we all call the other education, right? And so the opportunities I had, Dr. Gaspar was here earlier, the Academy of Future International Leaders, being able to do that, and I worked in a factory in the Philippines that manufactured integrated circuits. And when you think of a factory that makes integrated circuits in the Philippines, it's exactly what it looked like. Whatever you're thinking in your head, that's exactly what it was like. Everybody else in the academy had Fridays off. I had to work every other Saturday, right? And it was just those experiences. And look, Aggie's not lied, she to still tolerate those who do. If more people were like that in Washington, D.C., would be better off, right? So one thing I try to explain, I'm gonna get in trouble with some of y'all. From the outside looking in, you can't explain it from the inside. You can't understand it from the inside looking out. You can't explain it. Well, we got to be able to explain it, y'all. Okay, because it's too important to the ethos of this entity. And I go back to teaching you about servant leadership, right? And the things I learned in the other education from Dr. Malin and Sharon Riley, and all the times, Marilyn White, hit me upside the head because I was doing something stupid. She laughed. She was the only one that laughed because she knows it's true. Fred McClure, is great Aggies that come back, and it's awesome. And I don't see it's a difference, right? And so I'm babbling a little bit here, but we're doing something right, and caring about the rest of the world is something that A&M does well.
That's great. Well, we're really glad to have you back, and we hope you'll keep singing that song, just like the rest of us will be. Every time we go out, we're going to try and tell the same story. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about the substance of what you were saying. One of the things that you started out was talking about the border experience and how right now we're going through this unprecedented push of migrants. But most people, I don't think, are aware that the change in the migration patterns have shifted from Mexico, which is no longer the largest sending country for us, it's less than half, towards this Northern Triangle. So can you talk a little bit about how this shift has affected the border in particular, and kind of what that means?
So 20 years ago, the amount of illegal immigration we saw, it was single adults, males, coming from Mexico. And so if you look at how Border Patrol has evolved as an entity, it's been based against that threat. This year, it is family units, and it's about 80% is coming from the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And it's family units, so it's multiple people and children. The number of children is unprecedented. The highest time before that was about 2014. And so that's the change. And so I represent Tornillo. Tornillo was one of these places that were in the news. Border Patrol facilities are not designed to do long-term detention. You definitely don't want anybody in these facilities for more than a handful of hours, let alone children, right? And so they're not, the facilities aren't equipped for this. And if you take another facility, Clint, that's in my district, it's designed to hold 120 people temporarily. At one point, they had 700 children in that facility. It's just not designed for it, right? So the way the process is supposed to happen is Border Patrol, if you're the ones that capture people, and then you turn them over either to ICE or HHS. ICE takes adults, HHS is supposed to take children. If you don't fund ICE, and if you don't fund HHS, they're the ones that are designed to be able to take care of the health concerns of people that are ultimately in custody, making sure you get children into the right environments. There is so much research out there that says if you have a child in any kind of detention for more than 21 days, the long-term psychological effects is disastrous. So we shouldn't be holding kids for more than 21 days. We should be able to get them into an environment where they can get to school and eat right and all that. So part of it is a funding issue. And again, some of my colleagues want to argue about how bad these facilities are. Yeah, they are. But you got to make sure that we're funding the rest of this stuff for ultimately for this process to work. Net migration with Mexico, as you said, is actually reversed, right? And this is a problem for Mexico. So part of the reason we've seen a decrease over the last couple of months is the Mexican government is handling this issue, this crisis, a little bit differently as well, which is adding a little bit less pressure on our border. So hopefully that sticks even once we get into the cooler months.
Mm-hmm. Now, you had introduced or at least proposed legislation to specifically deal with a lot of the asylum cases, right?
Sure.
Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that and tell us what the goal of that was, what the mechanics were, and kind of how it fared in Congress?
So asylum, to qualify for asylum, you have to be one of 5 protected classes, right? Okay. So gender, religion, LGBTQ, right? And so you have to be part of a protected class. And then you have to demonstrate that because you're a member of that protected class, you are being persecuted for that reason. And if you're not being persecuted by the government, if it's another entity, you have to prove that the government is unwilling or unable to protect you. Mm-hmm. So those are the rules for asylum. And generally speaking, across the world, you apply for asylum in the next country that you're fleeing. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens. Why are there so many Syrian refugees in Jordan, right? Because they go to Jordan, mm-hmm. next place to go. Mm-hmm. And if you look at our courts, we have about a backlog of about 900,000 of these immigration cases. Mm-hmm. The average number of days it takes to handle one of these cases is something like 700 days, mm-hmm. right? You should be able to do an immigration case within 9 months. And only about 20% of the people that go through an immigration court actually get asylum. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, so people are taking advantage of the asylum process, right? That's why you've seen human smugglers increase their throughput to the U.S. They're coaching people on what to say. They actually don't, they're not going to ultimately apply for asylum. We're treating everybody that comes to our border legally as if they're an asylum seeker, even if they're not actually seeking asylum. That's gumming up the system. So some of the fixes were how you apply for asylum, making sure that we have enough judges in order to prosecute this. And guess what? We need the immigration judges not in Houston. We need them on the border, mm-hmm. right? Let's increase that throughput as well. So these were some of the kinds of fixes, and to codify how asylum is treated and used across the country, across the world. Excuse me.
If I may just try and clarify these last 2 points. So there's this influx of Central Americans from the Northern Triangle, and there's also this surge in asylum seekers. So can you just kind of connect those 2 dots? Like how many of these Central Americans are claiming asylum, and what's their claim? Because they're coming from, as you said, these incredibly violent countries.
Yeah, and so I recently went down to Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras and walked through the process on their end. They have these things called welcome centers. So if you get deported back to one of those countries, you all go to one location and they process you and try to understand and help you reintegrate in society. And one of the things people forget is that Mexico deports more people than the United States does, right? And so it's not just us. And in this was El Salvador, I asked, of the 90,000 plus people that had been deported back to that country, and I think it was a time frame of about 4 or 6 months. How many of them did you not find a family member to place them with? Mm-hmm. 9. Hmm. Not 9%. 9. Like only 9 people mm-hmm. out of a large number. In Guatemala, the number was even higher. It was near 100,000, I think, over a specific time period. 0, right? And so we are able to. So if we address some of those problems there, right? And a lot of times the violence is husband or wife, right? And because the local police are not somebody you can go to, then you have nowhere to go, so you flee. So some of the programs that we've seen the State Department working on basically has purged the local police, hired new people, trained them in community policing, the kind of policing that we see across the country, and guess what happened? Violence decreased. And when violence decreased, what else happened? You didn't see as many people leaving that municipality to come to the country, to come to the United States illegally. So we have these programs that are actually working and addressing these root causes. We just need to magnify them. And cutting off aid to these countries is the actual backwards thing to do.
Right.
We should be increasing aid in order to multiply many of these programs that are already existing.
So not just aid, I mean, one of the things I've done in my own research is estimated the relationship between remittances, which are the money that migrants send back to those countries, and the apparel that we buy from those countries, like our imports, right? And we find that when we buy less apparel, when there's fewer apparel jobs in those countries, the more remittances go back to those countries. So they either have a choice of working there or coming here to work. So when you mentioned this idea of OPEC and the Marshall Plan, could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because that obviously seems like a great idea. How can we promote investment in private enterprise in Central America in order to create more jobs for these people?
Well, this is one area, this is one reason I'm here, to hopefully get some of your students to help me work on this problem and identify some of the things.
We got some.
Some of the things.
Yeah, we got some.
And so how do we leverage those things together, right? Like, so I represent part of West Texas and South Texas, right? So the Eagle Ford Shale, the Permian Basin, we're seeing the energy renaissance happening because of those parts of my district. Natural gas, we're selling a lot of natural gas to Mexico. Why? Because if you decrease the cost of turning on your lights, you increase the cost of living, right? Why can't we continue that down through into Guatemala and other places, right? But they don't have the infrastructure in order to ultimately do that, right? And so what are some of those infrastructure projects where we could have OPIC funding and financing for that is going to create an environment for some of that trade to ultimately happen? And so I can't tell you the 10 things that I would do because there's so many, but OPIC is a leader. And part of the reason we should be looking at this way is because this is what the Chinese are doing with the One Belt, One Road initiative. And so they're leveraging all of their various factors of production in one direction. And so we're not doing this. OPIC is not talking to USAID. Hell, USAID is not even talking to the State Department half the time. Yeah. And so to be able to coordinate that effort to make it a little bit more effective and figure out how we one of the things that I found shocking is there is not a travel restrictions in Guatemala, El Salvador, or Honduras.
But there are in Mexico.
There are in Mexico.
There are in Mexico.
And so when you look at some of the best surfing and diving, and there's so many reasons from a tourism perspective to go there. Again, are there things that we can be doing from an infrastructure perspective that facilitates that increases their cost of living, prevents them from coming here, increases a trading partner that we have, and then we grow this NAFTA zone, further into Central and South America, in order to make sure the U.S. economy stays the most important economy. This is how all these things are connected and should be connected, and that's why paying a little bit more attention in our own backyard. We were talking at dinner, I said, James Monroe is turning over in his grave, right? The whole Monroe Doctrine, don't mess in the Western Hemisphere. Well, we've kind of lost that. The Chinese are here. We're not messing in the Western Hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine wasn't supposed to be for us. It was supposed to be for everybody else. But.
Right. So you brought up NAFTA, if you don't mind. We had a really fun NAFTA session here earlier this year. I think a lot of you were there. It was a lot of fun. And one of the things that people are talking about is the USMCA, which is sort of a revision to NAFTA, which hopefully would affect these supply chains and deepen these routes. Have you heard any buzz that you want to share with us about the USMCA, kind of what the status is or what's going on with that?
Look, it's a good deal. Any deal that has increased our economies by 400% over 24 years, I think that's a pretty good deal, right? The U.S., Mexico, and Canada, we make things together, right? We generate economic benefit from imports as well as exports. Toyota, hello, they're in my district, right? You know, those thousands of people they put at work building trucks. They're going in and participating in South San Antonio. And I've participated in a thing called the Interparliamentary Dialogue. This is a number of members of Congress, bipartisan from the US, as well as multiple parties in Mexico, having a dialogue on legislative-related issues. And what's funny, this has been around, I think it's been like 14, 15 years. Every year, and one of the communiques after this event was, we need to update NAFTA. Right? 24 years ago, when this was signed in my hometown, Amazon didn't exist. Yeah. The company, not the river, right?
The river. Yeah.
Right, nobody had ever heard of the phrase Eagle Ford Shale, right? And so a lot had changed. And so I think USMCA or NAFTA 2.0, whatever you want to call it, is a positive effort. Now it's going to, now it comes down to counting votes. And let me give you some perspective. The last time Congress passed a trade deal was in 2015. And this was to give President Obama TPA authority, Trade Promotion Authority. This gives the president the ability to bring a trade deal to Congress for an up or down vote.
Fast track.
Fast track. Republican House, Republican Senate, Democratic President. That TPA authority passed 218 to 217, right? In the House, 26 Democrats voted to give President Obama TPA authority. For USMCA, we're going to probably need about 36 Democrats. So we're going to need more Democrats to give President Trump a victory on trade than we needed Democrats to give Obama the ability to pass TPA. So that's the difficulty of the politics around this. But as long as Speaker Pelosi and Ambassador Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative, as long as they continue to say really positive things about each other in public, look, this is, when that changes, then I'm going to start getting a little nervous. But I think we can get this done by the end of this month. And Bill, do you agree, disagree? Bill said I'm more optimistic than he is. Look, the environment in which we're in now, getting this done is so vital to our economy. The amount of capital expenditures that haven't happened in South Texas and in northern Mexico is in the billions of dollars. The uncertainty about investment and stopping is in billions of dollars. This is having a broader impact on global trade routes, right? And once you, or global supply chains, really. And once you change a global supply chain, you're not changing it back. Right. Even if the deal gets sorted out, right? And so the opportunity costs are very high, and again, we all know what the deal is. Many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle saying they want enforcement of labor standards. Okay, great. You know who else cares about enforcement of labor standards in Mexico? The Mexican president, because he won an election on it, right? He changed laws in Mexico. He's already taken a number of steps to enforce labor standards in Mexico that we had never seen before. And when I go to many of my colleagues, I'm like, okay, what is the gold standard of language that you want to see included in the USMCA? They don't have it, right? So if this is your major issue, let's figure out what the language is supposed to look like and see how we can deal. So the longer we go the closer we get to 2020, the harder it is going to pass this. And this is, man, we should have done this. We should have done this a long time ago.
Yeah, and Mexico already made a lot of the changes to the labor laws, so they've already done sort of their part on enforcing labor standards, and that's still been kind of the hang-up. I was in Washington last week talking to members of Congress about the USMCA in particular. And one of the things I noticed was that you know, not everyone has a Texan point of view.
Yeah.
You know, Texans have a very particular view on trade and migration, and so and the border is different as well, right, from a lot of the other parts of Texas. Texas is so huge, and your own district is so huge. So how have you dealt with those differences in Congress? How do you go to someone, say, from Pennsylvania or Michigan, and try and help them understand the Texan point of view?
So it's wild. 26 states. Mexico is their number 1 or number 2 trading partner.
Yeah.
A lot of people that represent those states don't know that, right? Everybody, I guarantee you, everybody in this room has eaten a tasty treat from Sara Lee, right?
Sara Lee.
But nobody knows Sara Lee is owned by Bimbo, which is a Mexican company, right? There is a company that's based in Eagle Pass, has employs thousands of people in Michigan and Ohio called Rossini. People in those communities don't know Rossini's a Mexican company, right? And so we have forgotten that international trade matters and is important, right? This was decided in 1776 when Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations, right?
As I've taught all my students.
Yeah, right.
So you know.
And so we have forgotten the importance of this. And I think trade should never have become a political issue in 2016 because those of us that understand this fell down on the job in communicating why it's important, right? And so part of this is a re-education process of many of our colleagues. I wish I could pass a bill that says if you've never been to the border, you can't talk about the border. Make my life a lot easier. It'd make my life a lot easier, right? But part of it too is one of the things that we've been working with the government of Mexico on is trying to get more members down to Mexico. People don't realize Mexico City has more Michelin star restaurants than Paris, France, right? More than Paris, Texas, but also more than Paris, more than Paris, France as well, right? So there's this lack of there's a misunderstanding about where Mexico really is. I think Texans, I would say if we had a Texan perspective, more of a Texan perspective in DC, we could have sorted this out sooner.
Definitely, that's really great. And we hope we'll keep doing that. That's why I keep sending folks from A&M to Washington. That'd be great. Speaking of that in particular, right, as you know, right, we're at the George H.W. Bush School of Government and Public Service, and George H.W. Bush believed that public service was a noble calling, and I've had several of my students, if not all of them, who come here not to make money or go into finance or something. They want to enter public service and follow that noble calling. And I'm sure they would benefit tremendously from any advice you might have for these students going forward, looking at, especially because the climate's changing and whatnot, and based on your experience, what advice would you offer these students today?
So when I graduated in 2000, this was before the bubble, the tech bubble bursted really. And I had my degrees in computer science, so I had some pretty good offers. I had a pretty solid offer from IBM that was 5x my starting salary for the CIA.
Wow.
And my dad, my dear old dad, was like, boy, take the IBM job, you know? and he goes, he goes, one, it pays more money, and then two, he goes, I don't want to come home one day and my house blow up, you know? And I'm like, Pops, you're gonna be fine. If that's your biggest concern, it's fine. But look, to be able to be in service to something larger than yourself, right? Is intoxicating the right word? It's just something. It's a worthy pursuit, right? When I left the CIA and ran, I didn't have a plan B. 5 of us in the primary, I got 900 more votes, and the next person, but not 50% of the vote, went to a runoff. Everybody was like, at first, everybody was like, who's this guy? You know, he's never going to win. But when I won, everybody was like, oh my God, he's the next best thing. And then when I lost, everybody was like, how'd you lose? You know, and so I didn't know what my plan B was going to be, and I asked 75 people the same 2 questions. I was 32 at the time. I said, if you were 32 again, what would you do? And the second question was, if time and money wasn't an issue, what would you do? I think I asked Fred McClure. Fred McClure was in one of the 75. And I got 74 crummy responses, okay? Including yours, Fred, you know? But the 75th was the father of one of my closest friends. And he goes, Will, I don't know what you should do, but do something that's meaningful and hard, right? And I've learned when I look back at my time, right? Nobody thought that, you know, a black kid, computer science engineer at Texas A&M could beat the head Yale leader for student body president, right? Nobody thought that, you know, everybody told me there's no way someone who's just straight out of undergrad is going to get in the CIA. And everybody thought I was crazy to run for Congress, right? But in the end, all those things were meaningful and hard, and getting into public service does just that. And look, we are lucky to live in the greatest country that this world has ever seen. And we have a commitment to give back to it because of the opportunities that we have had. And we've come so far. You know, I always talk about my dad. So my dad's black, my mom's white. And being an interracial couple in South Texas in 1970s was not in vogue, right? I don't think the phrase interracial didn't exist back then. And my parents actually live in the house they live today because that was the only place that an interracial couple could buy, right, in San Antonio. It's 1971. And when my dad was a traveling salesman, there was places that he would go that he couldn't eat at every restaurant, he couldn't stay at every hotel. And now their youngest son represents, you know, that district. It's pretty amazing to see how far we've come. And so part of that is making sure that we're giving back to a system that has allowed that kind of growth. So I advocate for it. You always have time to have the financial resources and income to live a life that you want. When I was in the CIA, I literally had no expenses when I was overseas, right? And so I was able to put enough money away to buy a house and put $50,000 into a campaign and run for Congress, right? You know, and so I did that from, you know, after working in the government. So it's rewarding, and it's rewarding in that way. So I you know, that's why I always love coming back here, because of that commitment to service.
Well, I hope you know that you're always welcome here.
I know.
You're definitely one of our family, and I hope you'll please join me in thanking Congressman Hurd. Thank you so much. We're not quite done.
Oh, okay. All right.
We are almost done.
Is this lightning round? You
So,
know?
yeah, no. I'm tempted to pull out all kinds of other questions, but I know that we have some gifts.
Oh, wow, okay.
So one, we have this lovely plaque for you to commemorate your time here, which commemorates the speech that you've given for the conversation in public policy. It's critical that you're here to make this a success. So thank you very much. And I'm a little hesitant on this second. We have another gift for you, but after your opening comments, I'm a little bit hesitant. But we do have James Olson's book.
Yeah.
Signed by Jim Olson. So I want to thank you very much.
You know, I have a great place inside my fireplace to put that. No, look, Jim is great. And do I have time to tell one CIA
Please,
story?
yes,
CIA
as a matter of
story
fact, we do. Yes,
before we go. So when you're going to meet someone who's giving you secrets, right? You do a SDR, surveillance detection route, and I'm in a city I had never been in before, and I'm in a Toyota Tercel, which is a small car. It's kind of like a Ford Escort, and I'm getting ready to turn down what I thought was going to be an abandoned alley. When I turned down, it was like a parade. It's thousands of people, pack animals, folks selling their wares, and I'm going 4 miles an hour down this alley, and this woman walks in front of my car, and I mash on my brake, roll over her flip-flop, drag her foot across the concrete, right? Bust her toe wide open, meat's hanging out of it, bleeding, it's nasty.
You sure this is the story you want to tell? The last story?
And she looks in the car and realizes I'm not from around there and starts screaming bloody murder, right? I have a couple hundred people banging on the car, shaking the car. And the CIA teaches you, in this situation, get off the X. The X is the location where something's going down, and the last place you want to be when something's going down is where it's going down, right? But I didn't have enough, my car wasn't going to be able to get me out of this situation. I had a weapon, but not enough ammunition for this situation, and so I did what they least expected. I unfolded my 6'4" frame out of this tiny car, And everybody was shocked. Because one, I was like twice the size of everybody. And I knew some of the local language were not good enough for this situation. And I said, does anybody speak English? And this kid, I remember him for the rest of my life too. He parts the crowd, he raises a finger to the sky and says, I speak the English. And I said, sir, where's the closest hospital? And he asked the crowd, he's like, 4 blocks this way, he points to the east. I said, fetch me a rickshaw. A rickshaw is a scooter with a little carriage that can fit like 3 or 4 people. And he yells at the crowd, a rickshaw pulls up. I make a big display of taking some money out of my pocket. I hand it to this woman, and I said, take her to the hospital immediately, right? And the woman gets in the rickshaw, the little translator gets in the rickshaw, the rickshaw drives away, and the crowd literally starts clapping, right? They start patting me on the back. Some guy actually opened my car door and helped shove me back in this little car, and the sea of people part, and I drive away, and I look in the rearview mirror, and everybody's waving at me, right? And my heart was beating, right? Because I thought my mother was to get a phone call no mother ever wants to get, right? And it's a fun story to tell today, right? Because I've got to meet with some great Aggies for dinner. You know, I've had 4 vanilla lattes, right? I got to see, Sharon Riley and Jeanette Ferris and Dr. Sutherland. But I tell that story because there are thousands of men and women every single day and every single night putting themselves in harm's way in order for us to enjoy those inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? And it's great representing my hometown of San Antonio, but it's also great representing them, many of who this fine institution have developed. So thank you all.
You make us very proud. Thank you very much.